This week on The Futurists, Jon Snoddy.
So the fear is that we get used to good enough, that the stories are,
Right.
things are sort of good enough.
Right, like the world's gonna be full of AI-generated slop that's incredibly predictable and kind of boring. And yeah, you're right. That's a real risk. I think that's true.
And the risk is not just that. The risk is that when people are satisfied with that, then there are no longer jobs for young people to go in who are at the peak of their creativity and to have these new ideas. There's the market for their skills, if we're not careful, will allow that to dissipate.
Hey there, welcome back to The Futurist. I'm Rob Tercek, and this week I'm running the show solo as my colleague Brett is en route to Dubai, where we're planning the biggest futurist gathering of the year. We're going to have a big event there in September this year, and Brett has been very active in the Middle East the last couple of years, especially this year. But we've put together a great network on the ground, and we'll be telling you more about that event that is scheduled for late September in Dubai. But we are starting to gather futurists in person, not just on a podcast, not just online, but actually live in person. And we can't think of a better city in the world to do it in than Dubai. Dubai is kind of building their reputation on the future, so this seems like the perfect venue for it. When you think about cities around the world that are future focused, certainly Dubai is right on that list. This week, we're bringing the story closer to home. I live in Los Angeles, and I've been in the media business most of my career, and I love catching up with people who are moving things around in the media business. This is an industry that's going through tremendous amounts of turmoil right now. And this week, my guest is Jon Snoddy. Jon has a long track record in the media industry as a technologist who's reshaped the business several times, starting in radio. Spent a considerable amount of time at the Walt Disney Company as a technologist there, and also in the Imagineering Group. We'll get into that, I hope. But he's also an entrepreneur. And this is the kind of futurist we love to bring on the show, because entrepreneurs are people who put their money where their mouth is, or they put their effort where their ideas are, and they do everything they can to bring those ideas they've envisioned into reality. Jon started a company called Big Stage and exited that successfully a few years back. And now he's the founder of Operative Games. Jon, welcome to the show. Welcome to the Futurists.
Great to be here, Robert. Nice to see you.
Jon, tell us a little bit about Operative Games.
Okay. Operative Games is a company that's all about storytelling. I spent a long time kind of gestating this idea, probably 20 years of really thinking about how do you tell a story that has the audience inside the story, that where the players, the audience are active participants. They're the protagonist and truly a fundamental part of the conversation. And a couple of years ago, we kind of had gotten to the point where LLMs were maturing enough that they could create believable dialogue, and it started to look like it was possible to do this dream of mine, which has been to create worlds in which you can jump into that world with a bunch of really interesting characters that are not just chatbots, but feel like real people, feel like designed by artists in the same way you design a character for a great book or film. And with all that care, with all that history, with all that backstory, so that everything the character does comes from something inside, some point of view that they have, characters that seem to have anticipate their own futures, characters that have a past, and stories that kind of bring out who those characters are and challenge them, and then allow you to play along with them and be challenged with them.
So you're talking about two concepts that often we think are separate ideas. One is storytelling, where, the person with the gift of gab maybe enchants us with a story, and the rest of us sit there and listen carefully, and we're enchanted. The other idea is games, which is much more experiential in the sense that I'm the protagonist and I'm in that world and I'm driving the events through my own decisions. Those are usually considered two separate domains, but it sounds like what you're doing is finding a way to bridge them. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. There is there have been lots of great story games, and those will continue. There's a funny thing about new media new media comes in and you say, oh, there's now film and that's going to replace theater, and it didn't. And now
Right.
there's television that's going to replace film, and it didn't. And that,
Right. This is true.
somehow,
This is the conceit of every technology, right? We're
yeah.
like, it's going to replace everything. It's like, well, no, actually, there are still steam powered cars available if you look hard enough. They're still around, you know?
And we just seem to find space in our lives to accommodate new things if they're compelling, if they do something for us. And so this notion is, what if the story was the game and the game was the story? And
Okay,
so
so
you're
you're
still
blurring
playing
the
the game.
boundary between those two domains. How do you do that?
Yeah, I mean, again, when you say it's important to for this concept to be kind of embedded in the conversation, and that is that when you talk about a game, my goodness, there's thousands of types of games, subcategories and categories, and so many things that people love that they really enjoy playing. They go back to the same way that when I was a kid, I love TV shows or love films and
Mhm.
things, and and so this new idea is one in which people are complex, and when in our lives, it's sort of like this game we play where we're interacting with other people, with our bosses, with our employees, with our peers, with our families, and there's often competition in those things. There's supporting each other in those things. We have things we want to accomplish, things that drive us forward, that make us get up in the morning and do stuff. And I think we can build worlds that allow us to do those same things. There's an amazing thing that happens. I happen to think of books as one of the greatest inventions, one greatest pieces of technology ever created.
By the
Because
way, they're still going strong to your earlier point,
yeah,
right? We're
uh,
still
but
reading books.
but imagine the insanity of the notion that a writer that maybe lived 100 years ago that I will never meet, impossible for me to ever meet them. I can pick up a book that they wrote and start looking at those pages that are just paper with ink on them. And suddenly I'm feeling emotions that are exactly the same emotions I feel for my family, for people that I really care about, that somehow that artist was able to encode kind of humanity into those words, into that book, into that piece of technology. And my brain is able to decode it, and it just fits right into my whole self. So we know that works. We know this notion of sort of portable storytelling, portable emotions, that works really well. So what we're building is imagine meeting a virtual character. And this is a virtual character design. All of our stuff, our stories are written by real people. Our characters are designed by real people, and their backstories, their history, all of that's done by people. We don't go out and ask AI to do the creative parts of it. We ask AI to generate dialogue based on the character model that these artists create. But anyway,
Dynamically, or is it fixed? Is it scripted?
no, dynamically.
Oh, okay. So it's like an NPC character in a game that you can have a real conversation with.
I bristle a little bit at NPC, but sure.
Well, I mean, look, that's the old thing. Sure, that's true because those were like basically robots or animatronics, right? They did one thing over and over again. So, yeah, one of the big advantages of LLMs is that they can engage in a kind of conversation or a really convincing simulation of a conversation.
Yeah.
So that maybe okay, maybe you don't love the word NPC. Forgive me.
Well,
I'm
you
not
think
trying
about
to.
an
But
improv actor.
yeah,
I spent a bunch of time in the theme park business, and we would often use improv actors, people
right,
who know how to take on a role and then go out and act that role. They become that person, but they're not saying dialogue that someone else wrote for them. They're making the dialogue
right.
on the spot, but they stay in character. They are that person.
Right.
And
So
that's
if you're
where
going to be
these
Snow White or Cinderella at the theme park, like you got to really be that because there's a child there who you're either going to totally convince or who's going to be like, "Mom, this sucks." Like you got to really be that. You got to really show up and commit to the material.
yeah.
And you're able to replicate that today with artificial intelligence in a
Well, see,
similar.
the only way you can do that is, it's not like I could go hire, 100,000 actors
Right.
to perform this live. So in order to do this, I need some way for artists to encode into these virtual personalities, the decision making that would keep them in character and allow them to make decisions in a particular way. And so we're doing that, and it's working. And so when you talk to these characters, you're sort of in a sense talking back to the artist that created them in the same way you do with a book or a film or whatever. And you they present you with challenges, and not literally saying, here's a challenge. You just discovered that, oh no, they're in trouble. This person that I met, kind of cool. We've gotten to know each other. We're kind of hanging around, and then they say, this could be a little weird, but I think somebody's following me. I'm not sure what I should do. And you decide what you do with that as the player. And hopefully you're at a point in the relationship where you say, well, I don't want to get arrested, but how can I help you? And now all of a sudden there you are. You and this character are on your way trying to figure out what's going on. And in this first story we're doing called The Operative, it's just kind of a spy story that unfolds and gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and more and more and more characters show up in it. And it's a giant cast, and it's big fun.
Let me ask you a question about that. So this notion of creating a kind of game world that you could explore on your own, the game industry itself went through that with the kind of free range games. When I remember when Grand Theft Auto came out, it was kind of a breakthrough because prior to that, the sort of immersive worlds that we had before then were on rails in the sense that you could go to certain areas and explore, but only certain areas of the map. And otherwise you were kind of confined, and you could look out a window, but you couldn't go out there because that was like not really part of the game map. And then Grand Theft Auto came along, and we could roam the whole world. And of course, now we've got games like Call of Duty, where that's a central feature, where you decide where to go and what to do and so forth. And you can do that well, or you can fail doing that. So it's on you. That's important because it raises the stakes, it raises the commitment, raises the verisimilitude. How much free roaming is there in your story world? Can I go anywhere? Can I say anything? Could I get arrested? Could I get killed?
There'll be many, many stories that will be written using this sort of system that we've developed. In the first one that we're doing, when you're kind of inventing something new, it's important to, I've run research and development organizations for much of my adult life, and you learn pretty quickly, invent a manageable amount of stuff. Don't try. It's easy to get overwhelm the system by trying to make too many new things at once.
Yeah, or the audience, right? Audiences can deal with one or two new things, but you can't give them all new things. That's when we tell the same stories over and over because people like it.
We don't go into a movie theater and sit down and look at each other and say, what story should we tell today?
Or what direction should we be sitting facing?
Yes. So we go to entertainers and give them some money to take us on a little kind of like a little ride, take us on an emotional journey. And we feel like that's what people are coming to us for. Now, again, there'll be all sorts of things in the future, but this first set of games that we're doing, we know how the story progresses. We know the major milestones in the story, and we know those because we've created some amazing moments for you. That if you take I like to give the example of Darth Vader saying to Luke Skywalker, "Luke, I am your father." That was like oh my, what just happened in the Star Wars world? Everything just changed, and it was an amazing, like a roller coaster drop. It's this crazy thing that those writers and producers had secretly built for you. It's like they built this amazing thing for you. And then the movie was about preparing you for that moment, of getting you ready, getting everything set up so that moment really landed. And that's our job, I feel like, is we want to create some amazing things out there for you. And so we do need you to get to those things. We need to make sure you have the information you need for those things to make sense.
So this part of the story is a little bit, there's some guardrails to direct you towards key moments or key places,
and I think of it less guardrails and more magnets, that we want it to, want you to make a choice, but the information we give you, if we do it right, the logical choice is one that gives you the information that you need for the rest of the story to make sense. You can talk to any character you want. You can say anything you want to them, but they all work for us,
Mm-hmm.
And so they're in on it. And so you can challenge them. You can agree, disagree. You can be ornery. You can do anything you want. We contain all of that within the story, within the character's, design, so that you never have this sense of guardrails. You have a sense of choice, and you have a sense of, we need to move forward. We got to, there's the clock's ticking. We need to get going here.
Now, sometimes when we think about different media, we have to come up with a metaphor just to hold the concept in our brains clearly. And it's been said many times that TV is a river in the sense that it's flowing by constantly. And if you like something that happened a moment ago, you're not going to go back. You can on streaming rewind, but typically on a television broadcast, it's going one direction. It flows past like a river. But a game, a free range game, is more like a mountain in the sense that there's many paths and there's kind of a general direction up, and there's a general idea that if you get to the top, you won, right? That's a loose metaphor for a game. Which one would you say is a better model for what you're building? Is it a river or a mountain or something else?
I think it's something else. I mean, it's there are elements of both, and a lot of this is still being invented as we go.
Hmm.
But there is a notion of you're moving in a direction, but this thing of being able to choose, to make choices, to think about things, to figure things out. The like in this first story we're doing, there's a character that has a reason that he has to get rid of his smartphone. He's on the run from the police. And now he's cut off from the internet. We all have internet all the time. And yet somehow this guy is cut off from that. We give a story reason why that has happened. And he really needs you now. And so you and he are kind of joined now. It's almost like a buddy movie where you two must collaborate, and you have things you can do that he just cannot do now. And he has things that he knows about that you don't know yet. And so
What happened if you like walked away or said, sorry, forget it, I'm not going to help you? Like, is that possible?
you can do that.
Oh, you could. Okay.
You paid for the
Very
game.
social.
You paid for the game. So, at some point you might
That's
wonder
your choice.
why you paid for the game. And here's the thing is that generally is the thing that I found is that generally people want to believe. They want to be taken on a journey. It's not like you don't go into a movie theater and scream, "No, I hate you."
Right.
You
Right.
go to a movie theater because you want to see a movie.
And that's really true. We want to be enchanted. And frankly, a lot of people want to spend more time in a field of enchantment than they want to spend in the real world. Increasingly, it seems.
And so I do encourage, all the people I work with to focus on people that want to be entertained.
Right.
And not, if somebody really doesn't want to be there, that's fine. That's their choice. But we're not going to argue with you about that and spend a lot of time.
Yeah, we don't have to persuade you. You already bought your ticket. So hopefully you like the entertainment we prepared for you.
Well,
Now,
I mean, yeah.
when we watch a movie or a TV show, the storyteller in that domain is typically a director, perhaps, or a producer. We might say the writer plays an important role in it, but eventually someone's the storyteller. And they control a couple of variables. For instance, they control time. So in a movie, you can have, time can be compressed. We can jump forward in time. We can have a flashback in time. We can speed up scenes. We can stretch scenes out very long. This is one of the things that great storytellers in film manipulate routinely to create suspense and drive the plot forward and heighten the stakes and so forth. The other thing that the storyteller controls in that kind of environment is decisions. They decide not only what the characters are going to do, but they decide what you get to see. They decide what's revealed to you and when. And sometimes you see things in the Hitchcock way before the characters do, so you know something the characters on the screen don't. Sometimes you find out after the fact, and that's like a reveal or a suspenseful moment. Mm-hmm. I know I'm telling you stuff you already know. I'm sharing this for the audience to put it in perspective. But it seems to me when we talk about storytelling in a world that's free range, I, as the protagonist or the player, I have control over time and I have control over decisions. Talk about that as you think of the story structure that you're trying to build. That must present an interesting design challenge.
Yeah. The director has control over the camera. That's the huge one. The director can, slowly pan across the kitchen and you see the collection of knives as, or the bad guys across from you and he slowly pulls focus and you see a gun in the middle. You can do all those visual storytelling things that we aren't going to do. We're not going to cut to things and so we have to do those things in different ways. We've chosen not to. Now we do have in-story ways of controlling the camera. I should also say that in this first game, it's kind of cool the way it's played. In this particular story, these characters live in our world. They might be your neighbors. They live 2 houses down from you. You could imagine them just out there in our world. They have families, they have jobs, they have good days and bad days, they have aspirations, they have problems that they have things that that they're not going to tell you about because they're embarrassed about. And as you start to get to know them and as you start to kind of unfold that, you begin to know things about who they are and what their goals are and where they're going. In our in this particular game, they have phones, and you can literally pick up, your phone, standard phone, nothing special about it, call a phone number and talk to them on the phone. You can schedule a Zoom call with them, just like you and I are talking now. You can text them. You can send them an email. And so in doing that, it heightens this notion that they're out there.
Yeah, that's cool.
He's calling me on his way home from work. And
That's great.
yeah. And so,
So you're manipulating our media environment to create the illusion, to extend the illusion off the screen into the world around
and
me.
we're not building a giant game world. We're building little bubbles of game world that are essentially like Zoom backgrounds. And there are moments where the character might say, wow, this looks weird to me. Hang on, I'm going to turn the camera around, and shows you what he's looking at. And you and he talk about it, you talk about it together about trying to figure out, there's a moment where you go to a crime scene. He says, I'm going to send you a bunch of pictures. And he sends you all these pictures of it. And you and this character are going through these pictures together thinking, is that a clue? Did she leave? I think she's trying to tell us something, but I have no idea. It just looks like a deck of cards. And wow, whose blood is that? And so we're trying to be, like it use the camera that way, but it's not us using the camera. It's the character using the camera in a sense, and giving you little hints of
Right. So someone comes in and for a moment they're a little storyteller and they're going to tell you a story and you're going to listen and you're going to learn. If you pay attention, you'll get some nuggets. Okay, so that's pretty cool. So this is like a game-like narrative, or it's an immersive narrative that I can drive. But that's a kind of a new concept, sort of a hybrid, maybe a completely new category of content. One of the things that people should know about your background is that in addition to working as a technologist at a major motion picture company, you also design things like theme park rides. I think you did the Indiana Jones theme park ride, for instance, right? So
yeah, the ride system for that, yeah.
And in your comments, I'm hearing some of that thought process, where it's not just about linear entertainment. It's about, well, there are people that are moving in space and we have to kind of, create the entertainment around them. It's not something they sit there and watch. It's more like something they do. I suppose there's some lessons there from Imagineering and from the theme park world. Tell me about the formative experiences in your career that are informing your decisions about what to do next in the future.
Well, I have a journalism degree, and then I studied electronics engineering, and you mentioned I worked for NPR a million years ago, and there I just had my eyes open so wide to the notion of writing, and I know that sounds just silly and naive because I was naive at the time.
But for radio journalism, they do a very good job of pushing the possibilities of the medium.
It's you get to watch up close these people. Everything is a story. I mean, you're telling a story, and it's a story. It's a true story, something that happened. But you have to tell that in a coherent way, and to see these brilliant writers who they're good reporters, they're good. They have good voices, a million things, but they're first and foremost, everybody there, that writing was a thing. And I really came to understand that and appreciate it. And I feel like I took, suddenly an advanced degree in writing just by watching how those people would work and to listen to them every day and to know all the things that went into that, to sit there editing with them and know how they put that story together. And so that idea that storytelling it's a thing. You're not just throwing out a bunch of facts. I could tell you 10 facts about my life, and tomorrow you would remember maybe one of them. But I could tell you an interesting story about my life, and you'd remember all of them because that story is how we kind of encode things, and it's a way that we communicate. It's this way that glues all the facts together. And so that's just a place that I first learned that storytelling is sort of everything.
Yeah. And people have no capacity to remember facts. We get those wrong. We're very, very poor eyewitnesses, for instance, in court.
Yes.
But people do have an ability to remember stories. That's why many of the main religions, the big organized religions, are based on parables. You're teaching people stories they can remember, and of course, the principles are embodied in the narrative, or the moral of the lesson is embodied in that story. But you tend to remember the story quite well, and really, that's kind of the wellspring, at least partially the wellspring for our modern media enterprises. They're touching those same archetypical stories that are deeply embedded in our consciousness and our culture, and bringing them to life. Maybe new guys, new garb. A new configuration, maybe new characters, but still the same story structures that we've been trained by over generations to come to expect. in some respect, that's consistent across all media. Of course, it varies, right? The great thing about NPR is that they're artists in the sense that they think of all the audio information you can possibly capture that's going to drive that story forward. So one thing listeners will notice is that they always capture some ambient sound. You know, if there's a river in the background or some construction sound, they always capture a little bit of that, and you'll hear that, edited in the background to give it kind of verisimilitude. That's a kind of storytelling craft, that journalistic art of noticing what's around, and then kind of reconstructing it in the production process so that you can convey it to the reader, right? Similar to the book you were telling me about a moment ago, where a book that was written, generations ago, you could read it today, but once it takes root in your mind, you can envision almost realistically those events if it's told the right way. We even have these kinds of narratives going all the way back to Alexander the Great. Soldiers in his, kept their notebooks, and those can kind of help us re-envision or recapitulate what happened in those aeons, thousands of years ago. So there's a very powerful capacity of the human imagination. If you just feed it enough cues, enough stimulus, you can kind of engage it in the process of co-creation. So the stories really happen in our brain, even though they're being presented to us through media. And that's certainly true. I would imagine you had that same experience working on theme parks, where it's like, okay, now they're going to live the experience, but they already have an idea of what the story is because everybody's seen the film. Now we have to recreate that experience in a way using different stimuli to trigger that same response.
Yeah.
And I guess how close can you get is the question, right? When you're doing a theme park ride, like you look at the movie, then you're like, okay, what can we do in the real world to simulate that or to stimulate that response without, exposing someone to a giant rolling boulder that could crush them or, some other perilous trap?
Yeah, and it's not just you're not doing a book report. It's not that you're trying to take the movie and make it 3D and recreate those scenes. It's funny if you tell too much. I think in a theme park ride, people ride it and then they're kind of done. And what you really want is, one of my favorite rides is Pirates of the Caribbean. And, you ride that thing and think, what the hell is going on here? I don't know what's going on here. But your brain is just working, trying to put all these really interesting, this is not random. There's something really here. And so you find yourself stimulated as you try to put that together. And that's exciting. And each time you go back, it's just, you see another thing and another clue and you're putting things together. And with Indiana Jones, there was there was really had to figure out what is that attraction? What do you do with that? So we sat and had a little team. We watched the film several times, and the thing that I kind of came away with is that was important is that Indy represents us. That it's sort of everyman. It's just a regular guy. He doesn't have a cape. He's not a superhero. He's just a regular guy thrown into crazy circumstances that are overwhelmingly bad, and he's hanging on by his fingernails. And the fact that he gets through, we're amazed that he got through, but he's amazed that he got through as well. He's not like Superman that goes, "Here I come to save the day," or whoever said that. And so I wanted that. I wanted you as the rider in that ride. I wanted this to be your story about you going through all these crazy things, and you get through at the end and you can't believe you survived. And so everything about that ride, I wanted you to believe that it's really a truck, because to the extent that you believe it's a truck, when it starts to tip over, that's bad. If you think of it as a roller coaster ride, it tips and it's like, yeah, all right, roller coasters go upside down, big deal. If you believe it's a truck, then it's like, oh no, something, I'm in trouble here. I need to rise to this occasion. And so that's just another type of storytelling where but again, it's trying to get you to tell your story in that, make it your story. So it's not just you sitting there watching someone else's story. It becomes your own. And that's kind of what's memorable when you go build a place that makes it cool.
Jon, we're going to go to break in a moment here, but before we go to break, one thing we like to do is ask our guests a series of short questions, short response questions. And this is going to be more about what inspired you or what got you going. The idea here is just give us the first response that comes to your mind. This is what we call the lightning round. So are you ready for the lightning round?
Probably not, but go ahead.
Here we go. Tell me about a prediction or a forecast that you once heard that is the most accurate forecast or prediction that you ever heard in your life. The thing that has come true, in your opinion.
I remember I was really interested in the emerging computer graphics long ago. And Ed Catmull
Mm.
did this thing of his own hand, this little kind of movie of his own hand, and it was, kind of a green screen, wireframe, nothing. And he was saying back then, when there was, you were typing everything in on a keyboard, there was no graphical interface, nothing like that. And he was talking about how you're going to make films with computers, and that was insane. That was absurd
It's
to
true.
see it so early.
I
And
remember
then,
those days in the
yeah,
early 90s where it was so difficult to even get a wireframe rendered, let alone
well,
put
this
a
was in
skin on it.
this was in the late 1960s.
Oh my gosh, that's really visionary. Oh wow. Okay, so
And
that
well,
is a
I guess
forecast
for him,
that,
those it was for Ed, it was in the 70s, but still, it was
and
early.
that's a forecast that definitely came true. And
Yeah.
and famously, for those who are listening, Catmull became one of the founders of Pixar and a very important, pivotal figure in the world of animation and in Walt Disney as well. Okay, next question. What is the first narrative of the future that inspired you? It might be, say, science fiction on a TV show or a science fiction book that you read when you were a child. But what is the first narrative about the future that inspired you?
Um, 2001: A Space Odyssey was a very interesting film for me. It predicted a normal world where people live not just on Earth but in space, and there was so much of that film that was just normal life, especially the first part of it, the jogging and all those things. And you really had this notion of just getting up in the morning, get some coffee, go out and exercise and get on about your day. And that to me was kind of cool. That notion that there are lives that are normal people, sort of like me, that can happen in extraordinarily different circumstances. And
Important at the time too, because in the late 60s the typical sci-fi story would be something more like a Buck Rogers fantasy where it was all
Yep.
swashbuckling, kind of like a futuristic version of a pirate story, a romance. Yeah, so the idea of like a quotidian life, kind of boring functionaries who are just doing their job and but happen to be in space, that was a big breakthrough. And that was even before Star Wars, where, George Lucas borrowed Mobius's concept of like a slightly used universe. So the spaceships had dings and nicks and stuff. They had been well worn, That also was a big breakthrough for audiences, I think,
Yeah.
because it made it feel more real, more believable. They were able to suspend disbelief because it wasn't just a shiny future, a perfect future. It was more like a slightly used future. Okay, great. We're going to take a little break, folks. We're talking to Jon Snoddy. This is The Futurist, and I'm Rob Tercek. We'll be back in 1 minute after these words. Hey, welcome back to The Futurist. I'm Rob Tercek, and today we're recording with Jon Snoddy. Jon is a technologist in the motion picture and entertainment industry. He's been doing this for many, many years, so we were just regaling each other with stories from the past and some of the predictions from the past that actually came true. Jon, how do you get inspired? Tell me what information you take in. What's your methodology or process for formulating a theory about the future that you act on?
I don't know that I have a formal process, but I
Mhm.
will say that I'm interested in everything, and I read, I watch videos, I challenge my friends, we share things, and challenge each other. I like to do. I've had jobs, a lot of sort of migrated toward jobs that are about being inspired and about creating new things. And so I tend to surround myself by people who think that way, people who are open to new ideas. And again, we all challenge ourselves. Running an R&D organization I recommend it highly. Everyone should go do that. Because
That's
what
all it is. It's like, okay, we got to try a new thing. But you frame it as a hypothesis, right? In R&D, it's like, we're going to attempt this thing, and here are the criteria for success.
Yeah, well, often the way I would do that with teams is I would start with kind of a story of
Oh, interesting.
there was
Okay.
one that was a thing that I was wondering, could I take an object and, there are some people have been working on gyros and using gyros inside of a cube to make that cube move in ways on a desk that seemed kind of clever. And I wondered, could I take an object and have some sort of inertial stuff inside it and throw it into the air and animate it as it's falling? And that led to a bunch of things that finally culminated in that Spider-Man robot at the Disney parks in California that flies through the air untethered for 75 feet in the air. And so things, that thing of just posing a notion, often there was a question that I posed to one team of, would people have a serious conversation with a cartoon character? Just things like that all the time, where you get to think about something that's kind of absurd, but then you go after it. And I love that way of doing kind of applied research, where you start with a hypothesis and go try to make it true. And that uncovers the missing pieces, and those become your research topics.
Got it. It's interesting how powerful a good question can be in that process. For instance, the question, why not? Usually when someone says, I'm trying to do something, I'm stuck, and someone says, oh, why not? They're being sarcastic or snide. They don't really expect a response. But in a brainstorming session, when you identify an obstacle, it's actually quite a constructive question to ask, why not? Because the answer to that question will enumerate all the obstacles and all the things you need to surmount. And then, like you say, those become research projects or design challenges to solve.
There's an interesting thing that, sorry for interrupting, but
you're okay.
That's a real driver for me that I constantly find myself having to tell people. You get into something and you go, well, if the frame rate was a little higher, or if the color depth was a little deeper, or if the field of view was wide, just there's always these things. And it's easy to get all wound up in the technology itself. And for me, I rarely have found that the technology is the problem. And so the thing I always challenge people that work with me to do is just assume the technology. Describe perfect technology. Imagine everything you're talking about working exactly the way you want it to work. Now what? What's your idea? What would you do with it? Because that's really the hard question: is it worth doing? What would you do with that? And if you find
otherwise, people will kind of shoehorn their idea into what they think is possible, and then they don't really ever express the larger concept or the bigger goal.
Or obsess over just making something better just for its own sake, when in fact, does it need to be better? Does it, assume the technology, assume it's perfect. Now, what's your idea? How does that change my life? How does that make the world better?
That's a good framing. Okay, so that's your process. Your process is one where you're open to lots of input, and you love to work collaboratively with people who bring an open-minded viewpoint. I think that makes good sense. Let me build on that by introducing a new topic. This is a lively discussion topic right now, this week that we're recording in the end of June. And that's about LLMs, artificial intelligence as a collaborator, artificial intelligence as a kind of collective intelligence. Now, the subject of large language models and generally generative AI, this is a controversial topic for many, many reasons. We've covered the copyright issues several times on this show, so we don't need to delve into that. You can bring it up if you'd like, but I think, candidly, our audience has heard quite a lot about that. I want to bring up a different topic that we haven't spent as much time on. I think it's quite useful to bring it up in this context with you, and it is this. Storytelling in the past has been seen as a solo endeavor. There's a storyteller, there's an author, there's a writer, there's a director. Now, it's certainly true in industrial entertainment like motion pictures and theme parks. That's more of a collective enterprise because now you have a team of people. And in some respects, Walt Disney's Imagineering team is a kind of high standard for that, of how to organize collective creative process to build an even more convincing fictional world. But now we're moving into a situation where your collaborator isn't necessarily a group of like-minded humans. Instead, your collaborator is a machine intelligence. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I'd love to have a part of conversation about that idea with you.
Well, it's just the mind reels with all of the
okay, too big of a question.
The directions you can go with that.
I can narrow the question if you like.
No, but I mean, I do want to say that I'm looking forward to us as humanity getting some resolution as to how human invention is rewarded in this new world.
Yeah, that's
So
an open topic. Sure.
everything is not just absorbed into the giant vor.
Five big tech companies kind of own
Yeah,
all of human culture. Yeah, that's a little bit, that's a scary Orwellian concept.
yeah. So let's just say there's some work yet to be done there in
Yeah.
that subject, and let's get to it and figure out how to do that. But there is something extraordinary about being able to ask ask ChatGPT about drug interaction. I was just prescribed a medicine, but I take this other one. Tell me about that. And when I think about how long it would take me to read all of those warning labels and scientific papers that led, and so there is kind of an amazing notion of, and it's not interesting for you or me. What it's interesting for is the 10-year-olds that are going to grow up in this world with at their fingertips every word that's ever been written by a human.
John, let me zero in on that because that's actually directly where I was heading for this thing. First, I definitely understand the point you're making, and I want to circle back to this idea of a collaborative partner in the AI. I think that's a really powerful idea for creativity as well, not just for drug discovery or medical research or anything. But bookmark that for just 1 second, because this notion that a rising generation is very quickly accommodating themselves to artificial intelligence. We see this not just in high school, but also in college. Yeah, there have been recent reports. New York Magazine, for instance, published an article that said basically everybody's cheating with AI right now because in college, not only are the students using LLMs to write their papers, but the professors are also using LLMs to generate the assignments. And so you sort of scratch your head and think, wait, is this really what college should be for? One person's using an LLM to create a challenge for another person's LLM, and where are the humans involved? Now, there's a prospect there that we develop a dependency on this externalized resource, that we become dependent. In this scenario, this is a dark scenario. This scenario, AI is a crutch, and it's a crutch for our thought process. So we don't develop the critical thinking skills or the original thinking skills, the innovation skills. Instead, we rely on this machine to help us generate ideas, to help us refine the ideas, to help us formulate them and express the ideas. And there is quite a bit of concern about the age group you just mentioned, young people, because they're going to be raised where these machines are relatively sophisticated. They're just going to keep getting better. That means that dependency hook could be driven deeper and deeper.
Yeah.
What's your reaction when you hear that? Is this something that sounds plausible? Am I giving you a spooky story from the future? Is this ridiculous? Tell me.
Every time I go somewhere, I tend to put where I'm going into my car's GPS. And just because I don't know, I like to know how long it's going to take me to get there. If I have to detour, I like to have it reroute. It really bugs one of my sons. One of my sons just says, "You don't need that. It's rotting your brain. You should be thinking about where things are." And in truth, if you ask him how you get to someplace familiar, he can tell you exactly, and I have to think about it for a minute. And that's an issue. I mean, in an age of do kids need to know multiplication tables? Do kids need to know?
Yeah.
And that goes up and up and up and up.
And some people scoff and they say, come on, you're repeating an argument we had about the graph calculator back in 1971. Like those were forbidden when I was in high school because it was considered cheating. Now they include them in the curriculum.
Yeah.
So, teaching people how to use tools effectively is part of what school is for.
Right.
These are tools that exist. We can't deny it. But I guess the question there is, are we fostering a dependency that will make it impossible for us to think independently?
Likely.
Okay, good. Let me flip it around. Let me ask another question. It's slightly different.
I knew you were probably hoping I would have a different answer.
No, it's okay. It's okay. So another way to look at this is just related, and I'm sure you can tie all this together. Another way to look at this is it's a collective mind that you're dealing with. When you talk to an LLM, it's not a singular mind. So instance, let's be more specific, ChatGPT or Claude, which is my preference for anything that's literary or creative. I think it just has a more literary nature. It's the way it writes. Anthropic's Claude. One of my partners in my business is Bay Rate, who's a great animator and storyteller, and he always says when you're writing with an LLM, you're communing with the wisdom of the ancients, and you can invoke the wisdom of the agents. Now you have to prompt well to do that. You have to know how to do that. If you just ask it for like advice on a story, you're going to get very average output. But if you know how to construct a really good prompt, you can actually cause that AI to kind of assume a role, and it can become an oracle and that channels because all the knowledge is there. It's just you have to invoke it in the right way. Now, this, to my mind, is more like collective collaboration, or collaboration with a collective mind that represents all the thinking of human culture. Maybe that's a little grandiose, or maybe there's something to that. What do you think when I say that? Is that a different idea than this idea of a dependency? Or are they fit
It's
together?
a
Maybe they're
it is a it's a slightly different idea, in that it is trained on the past. So it's not trained on new ideas, it's trained on old ideas. And the breakthrough ideas are right in there with the bad ideas, and it's not curated well. And you see that when you try to use it to really come up with something truly new. Now, what it's great at is format this for me so it looks like a script, and look at the script and tell me, give me some ideas on how to make this better. And those will be, your structure's wrong here. You got a dangling character. You brought them in. Where are you going with that character? Those things. And it's
they're like
great.
great script supervisors. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's true.
and
Continuity.
it embarrasses you that in 2 seconds it comes up with a page of things that will make it better. But when you say, "Give me a new idea,"
Yeah, a better
I haven't
plot
found,
twist, a
yeah, I
deeper
haven't
narrative.
found those new ideas to be profound or interesting or as good as the people that I hire to write things.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if that is just that the machines aren't as good as they're going to be. There's probably some of that there, but there's also that notion is that it's trained on the past. It's
Yeah.
necessarily looking backwards rather than looking forward.
It's certainly, and an LLM is a prediction machine, right? So all it can really do is give us a probability about what the
Based on
most
the
likely
past.
next thing is. So by definition, that's going to be the most average possible outcome, and that goes against everything we know in the motion picture business about telling great stories. They're never about what people expect. You can set those expectations up, and then you want to defy them. That's what creates suspense. That's what creates that aha moment.
And
And
so
you're right, AIs are not so great at that right now.
and so the fear is that we get used to good enough. That the stories the
Right.
things are sort of good enough.
Right, like the world's gonna be full of AI generated slop that's incredibly predictable and kind of boring. And yeah, you're right. That's a real risk. I think
And,
that's
and,
true.
and the risk is not just that. The risk is that when people are satisfied with that, then there are no longer jobs for young people to go in who are at the peak of their creativity and to have these new ideas. There's the market for their skills, if we're not careful, will allow that to dissipate. And now there's
Real do you think that risk is? I hear that all the time on this show. People are like, oh, everyone's going to be unemployed. AI is going to take all of our jobs. I think that's fundamentally incorrect. What do you think about that?
I think that it is. I'll tell you, artists that I work with are people who are great at using the tools, and when I use Midjourney as opposed to one of our creative directors uses Midjourney, the result is dramatically different.
Yep.
They can do so much better, and I think
Yep.
that's going to be real. And I
And
think
that's
that
true
new
for
things
sound
will
design.
emerge.
That's true for story design. That's true for character design. Some people have the gift and they know how to make these machines do magical stuff. And for punters like you and me, it's like we appreciate that, but we can't replicate that, right? So
Yeah.
that says to me that there's still a role for a human being to direct the machine, to discern from the output what's useful, what needs to get fixed, and to redirect that machine. And that's like more of a director role.
I worry about things like people are worried now that like Spotify is getting filled up with AI generated, kind of okay sounding stuff. And nothing evil about that in and of itself, except that for every one of those, it sort of pushes out and takes up space and takes up plays from people who would be,
Yeah. There's a finite amount of attention. And if you fill that attention with more and more AI junk, then there's less attention and therefore less reward.
So it does seem like we need to be paying attention to that. We need to be thinking
Mhm.
about that. Is making sure that we're not accidentally allowing mediocrity to be the
I
thing.
mean, the funny thing about the Spotify example is they've been doing that for a long time, way before generative AI was on their landscape. They have all kinds of economic incentives to reduce payments to human creators, right? So they're doing everything they can, including AI generated music, if you will. But on the other hand, I look at that because I have many, many friends here who are in the recording industry who complain bitterly about Spotify and how their livelihood's been destroyed. But I look at that and I say, well, wait a minute. You seem to be operating with the assumption that the recording industry as we knew it is going to persist forever into the future. And I think that's a really faulty assumption because recording industry as we knew it really started in the 1960s. Prior to that, artists didn't make a huge amount of money. A few people, Benny Goodman, but it was like a handful of artists, right? And then in the 60s, they figured out how to make hits and they figured out how to remunerate artists. And by the 70s, that became the greatest job in the world because one good hit could generate, generational wealth for a recording artist or for the writer. That was an amazing moment, but that was a moment in time. And that moment seems to have passed. And some people here in town think the same thing is that same process is happening to motion pictures right now, where, there was a moment where you could do a blockbuster film that would achieve billions in box office and other ancillary revenue streams later. They're saying, well, that moment is faded now, and there won't be big blockbusters like that in the future. I don't know. That's a forecast. That's a prediction about the future. But when I run these ideas past you, how do you respond? And what is your thought about that?
It's hard to predict. It is, creativity does have a way of kind of breaking through. And I predicted that I think we will have like 9-year-old superstars that really just
Prodigies.
yes, that are really good at knowing how to use AI, knowing how to use the media, and I think that will happen. As things get concentrated though, you look at what's going on in the music business in pop music, it's all written by a small handful of people. They're all managed by the same companies.
Five guys in Sweden write all the pop hits. Like, okay, that's not an AI, although it might seem like it.
Yeah, but once you do that, you really are setting it up for AI to understand it so well that it's no longer random. It's no longer just
true, but that's on us as human creators. The more we rely on formula, the more replicable it is by a machine. That is definitely true.
And so we want to, as a society, create these paths that allow some randomness and stuff, that allow that. I've always tried to do that in organizations to make sure that everybody has a path toward, if you've got an idea, somebody will listen to it and make sure that that's just fundamental to the organization. And I think that we as a society need to make sure that we're doing that.
Yeah, I used to work with Tony Robbins, who I admire greatly. He's got some great insights about humanity. One of them is that humans have this inherent contradiction. We crave certainty. Like, we really desire certainty. When times are uncertain and unstable, like they are right now, people get very, very nervous and very upset. So we want certainty, and we also want novelty.
Yeah.
And we crave both, and we kind of vacillate between the two, right? So it's like, well, when things are too certain, that feels kind of boring and predictable. And now we want to be entertained. So we watch a show that's full of dramatic stuff that we never would have expected and wouldn't experience in our normal lives. And that satisfies that itch for novelty. And so in some respects, whatever medium you're using, if you're an artist, you have to pay off the desire for certainty. People want to be able to predict what's going to happen. They want to have a fan theory about what comes next. And then again, you have to defy that. Sometimes you have to tweak those expectations. I don't think the AIs have gotten to a point where they're the master of that yet. Now, that might come in the future, but I think at this point, you probably would agree with me. If you use an LLM, they're pretty good on the predictive part, the normal part. You set the, kind of world, the rules of the world, the characters and so on. They'll give you that situation infinitely. But what they don't get to is like the moment when the real world changes or the normal world changes and now something different has to occur. You would need an artist, a human artist would need to construct that moment.
Yeah.
Well, Jon, in the remaining minutes that we have, if you would please tell me what you think the world of entertainment and media is going to look like in 25 years. So let's just project out, put on your futurist cap, and go out to 2040.
I was hoping you were going to say 25 minutes because...
Well, that's okay. It's an arbitrary figure. Tell me what you think the future is for media and entertainment. Are we going to go to movie theaters? Are we going to have one big blockbuster? Is there going to be Avengers number 47?
Let me tell you a little story about one of the senior executives at Disney. The first time I worked there, he said, I was at a level in this company where I could kind of ask for kind of crazy things. So I said, I would like to bring my family. I'd like you to open Disneyland an hour early, and I'm going to bring my family over, and just me and my family, we're going to walk around Disneyland. And it's going to be, I want all the rides running. I just want to do that. He said, I know it's self-centered and self-indulgent, but I want to do that. So he did. And he said, we rode the first thing. And then he said, we were on Big Thunder. I think it was Big Thunder, he said. And, we're running. And then we just kind of looked at each other and said, this is weird. This is creepy.
It's like Westworld. Yeah, a depopulated theme park.
And he realized that Disneyland is not the rides. It's you and those people experiencing it together.
Mm-hmm.
And if you could imagine that, wouldn't it be, I mean, especially, like July 4th, I'm sure there are going to be a lot of people that are jammed into those parks thinking, wouldn't it be great if all these people weren't here? But in truth, no, it wouldn't. And that humans love to do things together. I think that's what is that enduring thing about theme parks is when you do it right, it's about, you could take away all the cues, but in fact, I don't think you want the cues to be zero because then you just sort of run through it all and you're done. And you need some time to digest it and some time to hang out with your family. And it turns out that that's part, just being around all those people is one of the things that this is all about.
Okay, and so for all those fans of Disneyland and Disney World, stop complaining about standing in line for an hour because that's part of the experience you're paying for, and learn to relish it.
I don't work there anymore, so there's nothing to tell you that. But I do believe that, and people I've talked with, and I've done it. I've been there, ridden the rides late at night, with nobody else there. So all that is just to say, people like to be with people, and I don't think AI changes that. That doesn't change who we are fundamentally. So there will be things that draw us together and allow us to go experience things with strangers and friends and stuff and celebrate things together. That's a thing that I think will, you can look back through humanity. That's one of those enduring things. So I don't know that we'll go to movie theaters, but we'll go to something. And I can imagine that we will be able to sort of, connect into our brain waves and, jack in some sort of a entertainment device. And that will be a thing. I mean, all that's going to be there, but I think we still are going to like to go do things together.
So in a way, that's another collectivist kind of thing, that's a collectivist experience where we're all there together. And the fact that there's 100, 200 people in the movie theater with you adds to the experience. The fact that there's thousands of people at the theme park kind of adds to the experience.
Yeah.
It's certainly true at a rock concert, right? Which is by far these are the highest ticket items right now for entertainment, for live entertainment. Sports, where you go in that room, the 70,000 screaming fans and the roar, it really gets you going. It transports you to a different kind of world.
Mm-hmm.
And the more our lives are, the more that our lives are regulated and predictable and safe and calm, the more we seem to crave those moments, those transportive moments that take you into the collective, the roar of the crowd, if you will.
Yeah.
Well, gosh, Jon, this has been a great pleasure. Tell me how our listeners can find out more about you and Operative Games. Where can they find you on the web?
Operativegames.ai. Find us there. Go there. That'll point you to a bunch of other places you can get to, and that's probably the easiest place to find us.
Okay, cool, great. Well, Jon Snoddy's been our guest this week on The Futurists, and thank you very kindly for joining us. I want to give a big shout out to the folks at Provoke Media that make the show possible, including our producer, Elizabeth Severance, and our engineer, Kevin Hirschhorn, and my partner in business, Brett King. He's great, but he's traveling this week. We'll have him back next week for sure. And we're going to be doing a live event in Dubai at the end of September, just around the corner. And so I certainly hope that those who are interested will see you there for the largest gathering of futurists in the world. We'll be back next week with another person who is shaping the world of their vision, shaping the future as they envision it. And until then, we will see you in the future.